This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 11 a.m. Is what I'm so used to saying every single Friday. But yes, we are once again during the lockdown and COVID. We are broadcasting live from my bedroom one more Friday once again. Some of the benefits to this is we did add the YouTube version of this. So we've got our cameras on. If you're a longtime listener to the podcast, you know that we've added that over the last year or so here. We've got a fantastic guest for us today, Ron Gonen. No one has more experience or knowledge of the circular economy than Ron Gonen. In the waste-free world, he shares his wisdom to the benefit of all of us and the planet that we live in. And this is a quote from Professor Bruce Usher. Ron is patiently waiting, and he will be with us very, very shortly to discuss and kind of do a deep dive into his new book, The Waste-Free World. If you are a longtime listener, you know we use just the first few minutes of a show to give you kind of a calendar or what's going on in the Gulf Coast area when it comes to financial literacy. We just got through Financial Literacy Month, April. For Houston Money Week, this has looked very, very different than the prior years past, where we've gone out to local organizations doing live presentations. We are partners with a nonprofit group, the Vita Group in Houston, that does tax preparation for low to moderate income. This year, it's been a lot of online events and that sort of thing. So I do want to remind people to check HoustonMoneyWeek.org. There's always something, even though we're getting past Financial Literacy Month, there's always something going on with Houston Money Week. So check that out. I do have a webinar coming up for teacher retirement system for state employees. That's going to be on May 19th at 6 p.m. Other than that, that's a short calendar that will give us plenty of time with Ron here to dive into his book. So Ron, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And I want to share your bio with listeners so they can get to know you just a little bit better. Now, you're the founder and the CEO of the Closed Loop Partners, which is an investment firm and an innovation center focused on building the circular economy. Closed Loop Partners maximize value by aligning capitalism with positive social and environmental impact via investments in material science, advanced recycling, technologies, supply chain. Let me take a breather here. Supply chain, sustainable consumer products. That's a lot. Ron, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book, I wanted to start with the book that you just released here, The Waste-Free World. Why did you write The Waste-Free World?
In the past decade, I've had the opportunity of both serving in government, where I helped lead New York City's sanitation department under Mayor Bloomberg, which is the largest sanitation department in the Americas. And the mayor brought me into his administration to focus on building advanced recycling infrastructure and what we call circular economy infrastructure, because Mayor Bloomberg, being a businessman and in a mayor's office, was looking around and saying, we're spending $400 million a year exporting waste to landfill. This is ridiculous. There have to be advanced recycling technologies and businesses out there that can process this material locally, generate good jobs, generate revenue for the city, and most importantly, avoid that $400 million in disposal costs. And then since the end of the Bloomberg administration, I've been running my investment firm, Closed Loop Partners, and that's given me a window into some amazing innovations taking place both in the United States and around the world that can help significantly reduce costs of manufacturing, costs of households as we move towards more sustainable products.
So, you know, as I haven't finished the book, there's a lot of really good information here. I'm taking my time with it. I started it, but as I was preparing for this interview, our refrigerator, our freezer broke down, and we ended up having to get a new freezer. And so I took that freezer and I put it out on the curb, And before the time I made it back into the house, somebody had come along in a truck and picked up the freezer. And I was thinking, this is a sign for circular economy and recycle.
Absolutely.
One of the things you talk about is a duty to really a duty to waste. What does that mean? The duty to waste.
Post World War II in the 1950s, and the best way to actually capture this is if any of your listeners used to watch Mad Men, the show
Yes.
about right. So Mad Men was about this new industry that was started in the 1950s to effectively just hawk product to Americans, right? It's like, how do I convince somebody that they cannot live without buying this product? The money in their wallet is not worth as much as using that money to just buy this thing. That's what Mad Men was about, and that era really became unfortunately a kind of a core part of the way our culture started to develop in the U.S. and that was a culture around the way you measure a person or a family status is by how much stuff they have, right? Like how many cars they have, how many homes they have, do they have a boat? Yeah, what kind of barbecue they have, just stuff, right? So, and that's actually where the phrase "keeping up with the Joneses" came from. But if you look at our culture before 1950 and the marketing messaging we were receiving against Americans, it was very much focused on quality, not quantity. The quality of the product was key, not the amount of products you had. And the other thing that was really a core part of the messaging we received was that recycling was a patriotic duty. The more we recycle, the more we create local jobs, the more we reduce the cost of disposing of things in landfill, and the more we have to rely on natural resource extraction and commodities from other parts of the world that are politically unstable and probably aren't our friends.
So I remember the effort, or we learned in history, the war drive for aluminum and that sort of thing. That was prior to that 1950, and then the image of Mad Men definitely pops into my head. Then I want to take a step back because even the idea, I love the idea of just the circular economy. But for listeners who go a little bit further and expand, tell us what that means, circular economy.
Sure. The best way to start defining the circular economy is to explain the linear economy that we've been operating under for the past few decades, which is in order to manufacture a product, first you extract a natural resource. It's oil if you're going to make a plastic, it's ore through mining for a metal, it's timber if you're going to make a paper or wood product. And that goes into a system in which products are effectively designed to be used once and then disposed of. And that's the linear economy. You extract, you use, you dispose. You extract, you use, you dispose. You're basically living on a conveyor belt. And there's two big costs there. The first is to get onto the conveyor belt, which requires natural resource extraction, and that's expensive. And then to get off the conveyor belt, it's you put something in a landfill, which is also expensive. So that linear system is what we've been operating on for the past few decades. And we believe that we can be a much more robust economy if we focus on a circular economy where we invest in advanced material science. So how do you make materials in a lab or industrially grown without the need for natural resource extraction? Invest in advanced product design, technologies, advanced manufacturing, and recycling technologies and infrastructure so that you're able to manufacture without being dependent on natural resource extraction or disposal in landfills. And if we can do that, you're going to significantly reduce costs for American consumers, taxpayers, create a lot of local jobs, and also protect our environment.
I love it. I love it. We've heard so much talk about infrastructure for years, but we might actually have people playing together nice and finally get some of it. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed here. Now, one of the things that you do write about the book that's fascinating is that the circular economy is superior because it's sustainable and generates better financial returns. Explain to listeners what this means.
Sure. What the data shows us is that if you invest in companies that first and foremost focus on transparency, that's where you're going to generate the most value for two reasons. One is you can see everything and anything that company is doing, from the materials they're using to the labor they're using to how much waste is in the system, and shareholders can ensure that that company is being optimized from an efficiency standpoint. If the company isn't promoting transparency, management can hide a lot of different things. And in fact, most consumers, whether they're Republican, Democrat, believe in climate change, don't believe in climate change, what they do care about is making sure there's trust between them and the person selling them their product. And so you also drive a lot of consumer growth and loyalty if you're transparent about what's in your product. So that's first where we see a lot of opportunity. The second area where we see a lot of opportunity when you invest in companies in the circular economy is you reduce risk. And that's, I think, what you're starting to see, just since you're in Houston with ExxonMobil, is for the past decade, shareholders at ExxonMobil have been saying, you need to be more transparent, you need to be more transparent, you need to be more transparent. And management and the board was fighting back against those shareholders. And just a lot of time and money was spent on that friction between shareholders trying to get more information, management and the board not being willing to provide that information. And then you fast forward to today, we're living in a different world. Right. Yeah, the natural resource extraction, relying on oil, fossil fuels, greenhouse gas emissions, it's a different world today. And ExxonMobil, unfortunately, isn't prepared for that world. And you're seeing that reflected in their stock price, where shareholders are losing a lot of value. They would have been much better off a decade ago being much more transparent with their shareholders and saying, here's the information. What do you want us to do? Like, you give us the guidance on next steps. So those are some examples as to why a circular economy will generate a lot more value for investors and shareholders.
I love that. Everything that you just mentioned, the transparency, it kind of dovetails with a theme that we've had on the show for quite some time, the corporate responsibility, social responsible investing. Being here in Houston, I have seen it go from the oil town to the energy sector to this kind of schizophrenic that last 4 years. We don't know what to call it, but at the end of the day, transparency is going to be huge. And we're seeing these companies' narratives change and kind of what they're having to tell the shareholders and that level of trust.
Can I give you an example of the transparency piece that's very relatable to a recent event in Texas?
Yes. Yep.
Look, the energy crisis you had recently, my guess would be there's very few Texans that feel like there's sufficient transparency in the energy sector in Texas, and that the government, in terms of the state government or the energy sector, is being transparent in terms of what happened, who's fixing it, and how do we make sure it doesn't happen again. That's not taking place at the moment. And so what that means is that the citizens of Texas are highly susceptible to all kinds of crazy and weird charges in terms of who owes money for fixing the system, who owes money for the energy they used, and whether or not their homes are protected from this ever happening again. And so through this experience of the energy crisis, of what happened in Texas during this year, consumers and citizens in Texas can begin to see the value destruction and the inconvenience that comes from allowing government and industry not to be transparent.
I think that's a perfect example. I think until over this summer, most Texans didn't even know what ERCOT was, and the fact that the energy stuff falls under the Railroad Commission here, who knew? Yeah. and now we're figuring it out.
But somebody didn't want you to know. That's the key.
Right.
Somebody didn't want you to know because they were making a lot of money by you not knowing. And that's why transparency is this core thesis around the circular economy. Is let's get the information out there, and then you let markets, shareholders, and consumers decide. Let's let the free market work. But the free market and capitalism can't function properly if information isn't being properly shared, and the people who are withholding that information are being allowed to game the system.
Absolutely. And one of that brings me to one of the questions in the book. We talk about misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation out there about this topic. You might even say, as we just did, that some of it's been on purpose. What can you tell us more about these disinformers?
It's related to the conversation we were just having on the energy crisis in Texas. Is anytime somebody would start to question the system of why is our energy grid set up this way? How is the money flowing? Rather than the state government or the energy industry saying, you're the taxpayer or you're the consumer, of course you have the right to ask that question. Let me open the books and explain this to you. Maybe there's a way to save money or become more efficient. What we would get instead is this disinformation campaign where the person asking the question would be labeled as a liberal, a progressive, a communist, a socialist, a tree hugger, and all of a sudden they would try to shift the conversation from, I'm just trying to find out how much am I paying, why am I paying it, and how do I know it's not going to go out on me, to a conversation around, are we liberals or are we conservatives? Do we believe in climate change? Do we not believe in climate change? And that's what these disinformers have become very practiced at doing in the US, is they shift the conversation to one that puts people in a tribal mentality and an us versus them mentality, when all the person was asking was, why am I paying what I'm paying?
Right.
Is there a way to pay less? And are we sure the system's resilient?
So let me ask it this way, because part of what you talk about in the book is kind of these metrics, these new systems of measuring economic health, relying less on on GDP and more on the true cost accounting and natural capital in order to hold polluters accountable and incentivize innovation that supports healthy ecosystem and local economies. Expand on that. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So in the 1950s and 60s, as the economy started shifting from quality to we want you buying as much stuff as possible, we started taking an economic metric, GDP, which is effectively how much stuff did we make and how much did we sell it for, and started using that as the core indicator of economic success. And what's interesting is the economists that developed GDP was actually very clear: never use this as your central determinant of the success of the economy. It's an interesting and valuable data set, right? It's good to know how much are we manufacturing, what are we selling it for, but it's not a central indicator of actually how healthy the economy is. And an example of that is GDP doesn't measure whether or not our salaries are going up, our healthcare costs are going up or down, our streets are safe or not safe, our local school districts are providing a good education or not providing a good education. It doesn't take any of that account. So the government can come to us and say, wow, we had a great year. GDP went up. We made a lot of stuff and sold it for a lot of money. And meanwhile, the streets could be getting dirtier and more dangerous. The local public schools could be lacking funding, right? Healthcare costs could be going up, and your salary may have been frozen for the last 3 years. To you, the economy isn't doing better. That's no indication. And so my point in the book is GDP it's an important indicator. There's a lot of valuable information there. But what we actually should be using to measure the health of the economy is, are wages going up? Are healthcare costs going down, and are we getting value for what we're paying for our healthcare costs? Is the public education system strong and a place that's providing our children a good future? Do we have access to parks and green spaces? These are the things that we should be measuring in terms of, do we have a healthy and robust economy?
Another question when we talk about this circular production is, can it lead to higher performance?
Absolutely, and that question is actually inherent in the circular economy, because what the circular economy ultimately is all about is how do you reduce waste in the system.
Right.
So it's intuitive that if you're reducing waste, you're becoming optimized and more efficient.
Just on its own, it's more efficient because you're getting rid of fat there and waste
Exactly.
and all of that.
Yeah. I mean, everything about the circular economy is just reduce waste, reduce waste, reduce waste. So by virtue of looking at things through a circular economy lens, you end up optimizing your supply chains and your systems.
One of the other things, and this is fascinating, we could just talk on this all day, but we are getting close to the end of the half hour. Believe it or not, how fast this is going here. But one of the things that was in the book that was very interesting was the greener grocer. You talk about greener grocers as an example. Tell us about that.
Sure. So one thing that a lot of Americans would be surprised to know is the used by and sell by date on milk and other perishable products that we buy. It's actually not regulated by any government body. It's simply a date that the retailer, well-intentioned, provides you as guidance on when they think possibly that milk may no longer be fresh. And they do it for legal reasons, right? Because they want to make sure they don't end up getting sued.
Right.
But it's really a very loose guidance, because as an example, they don't know if you're buying that milk and then walking outside where it's 40 degrees and walking 2 streets over and going up into your apartment and putting that milk in your fridge, or if you're buying that milk at a supermarket in Houston where it's the summer and 95 degrees outside, your car's been sitting in the parking lot for an hour while you've been shopping, you get in and it's 105 degrees in the car, takes time for the air conditioner to kick in, you drive 40 minutes to get home, and then you put it in your fridge, and they don't know that, right? And so those two experiences, the milk can be very different. And so the net result of that is we throw away a lot of food that is still perfectly fresh and edible, and there's no hoax going on here. There's no one trying to scam us. We're just way behind from a technology standpoint, and the good news is there's now technologies coming out that can more accurately tell us how fresh milk is or other perishable products after the point of purchase, which if we can get those implemented, it'll significantly reduce food waste, number one. Number two, cost for grocers, because they'll throw away less, and cost for consumers, because they'll also throw away less.
I love it. We had a nonprofit on here called Second Servings that their existence is going and taking stuff that's, quote, after the date, which is still good. Well, we're right here at the end, and man, we just barely skimmed the surface. The book, you go into so much stuff in here. I would recommend this as a good read for people. I know it's on Audible, because that's where I'm listening to it. And then they could go to Amazon as well. Is that right?
Anywhere that people generally buy their books. So Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble, local bookstores as well have it. So for any of your listeners, anywhere that they generally buy books, they'll be able to find the WasteFree World.
What's a good website for listeners who'd like to find out more about you, Ron?
Come to my firm's website. My firm's called Closed Loop Partners. And we have a lot of resources on the circular economy and our different portfolio companies. We actually have a major investment in Texas. For your listeners in Texas, we're the owners of Balcones Resources, which has the long-term recycling contract for the city of Austin and operations in Dallas, and looking at doing things in Houston and San Antonio as well. So.
Nice. We love it. Good. Well, good. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Be curious. Ask questions about how much is my city paying to get rid of all this waste. In America today, we spend billions and billions of dollars disposing of waste in landfills, and those are our tax dollars. So one thing you can do is definitely ask your local city council person, your mayor, your governor, your senator, your congressperson, what's going on here with waste in landfills, and what can we do to stop using taxpayer dollars to dispose of waste in landfills?
I love it. I love it. Well, Ron, thank you so much for visiting with us, and have a great weekend.
All right, thank you. You too.